I examined the casualty reports carefully, my eyes drifting over the data on the scanner's display. According to the latest update, only a few million humans still remained alive on the surface of that ravaged planet. Once teeming with billions, they had been reduced in a matter of cycles to scattered pockets of ragged survivors, huddled together in small areas on one remaining continent. The other continents, previously lush and thriving with civilization, had either been cleansed entirely or simply glassed from orbit during the opening phases of our attack. It had all been straightforward initially. We targeted their strongest points first: military installations, air bases, defensive missile silos. Anything capable of threatening our fleet was vaporized with precision strikes. They attempted to resist, of course. I recall the moment their nuclear armaments were launched, streaking skyward in a desperate salvo. But their primitive weapons were meaningless against the strength of our shielded warships. The blasts, feeble against our barrier fields, were nothing more than harmless bursts of light and radiation. After that, the humans stopped putting up any coherent resistance. Within a single cycle, their so-called organized defense had collapsed. Now, as I sat aboard my command vessel, the task was simpler, but infinitely more tedious. We were to finish the job, mopping up survivors and perhaps capturing a few as slaves. The procedure was standard: secure the resources, verify the planet's subjugation, and then haul away any living specimens that might be of use. Still, something about this situation nagged at me. The humans had folded too quickly, which should have made our work easier. Yet somehow a sense of unease lingered in my mind. A voice from behind me broke through my thoughts. "My Lord Radiance," it stammered, a weak, quivering tone. I spun my command chair around slowly, not bothering to conceal my irritation. The speaker was one of my subordinates, a hunched creature from a lesser race conquered centuries ago, now serving in my crew. "What is it?" I demanded, my voice low and sharp. "Can't you see I'm busy analyzing these reports?" I narrowed my eyes. My impatience was earned. I had little tolerance for interruptions unless urgent. "Forgive me, O Radiant One," the subordinate groveled. He extended a datapad with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact. "Captain Varus of the Castilia sent a report. He requested that I deliver it to you immediately." I took the datapad. The display scrolled through new data, strange anomalies in a few sectors of the planet's surface, some odd readings that made no sense. Machine malfunctions? Unlikely. A trick of the remaining human survivors? They lacked the resources for advanced sabotage. Still, I found myself chuckling involuntarily. "So the locals have some fight left in them," I murmured, feeling a slight spark of interest. "Very well. Send down Deus Legion. Deploy all of it. I'm through taking half measures." As I concluded this order, the communication array chimed. Captain Varus, no doubt. I composed myself, adopting a regal posture as I answered. "Captain Varus of the Castilia," I said, feigning warmth I did not feel. "You have news?" "My Lord Radiance," Varus barked, urgency clear in his voice. It was rare for a subordinate to sound so unsettled. "One of my fleet cruisers is not responding. Her shields and engines have shut down without explanation. I need authorization to send in a repair crew. Flame me if you must. But I need it now." I raised a brow, amused by his desperation. "Varus, is that fear I detect?" I asked softly. I delighted in the prospect of punishing such insolence later, but the tone of his voice did unnerve me slightly. Before I could answer, the communicator chimed again, more captains, more frantic voices crowding the channel. "My Lord Radiance," came another voice. "My entire engineering crew is missing. My ship's shields are failing, and I cannot raise them on comms." Yet another plea followed. "I've lost contact with one of my enslavement teams, my lord. They are simply gone, no response to hails." "Silence!" I barked, cutting them all off. The bridge fell quiet, save for the hum of the consoles and the distant mechanical thrum of the ship's reactor. Something was wrong. Very wrong. It appears the locals are offering resistance of an unexpected nature. Captain Rari, send the entirety of Deus Legion groundside. Finish them off completely. We can worry about slave acquisition later. Rari hurried to comply. I turned back to my displays, feeling a cold sweat form beneath my armor's collar. A full hour passed. I tried to immerse myself in fleet logistics, scanning the star field beyond the viewing port, admiring the strength of our armada. My momentary admiration ended abruptly when I saw, through the expansive glass, one of our frigates break formation without warning and dive toward the planet at suicidal speed. What is the meaning of this? I snapped into the command module. Why did that ship break away? My Lord Radiance, an underling replied. We know not. The frigate simply cut communications and accelerated towards the surface. At that velocity, it will disintegrate on impact. It makes no sense. I gritted my teeth. I don't care about that ship. Focus on Deus Legion. Have they been deployed as ordered? My underling squirmed. Yes, my Lord Radiance. They landed about 10 minutes ago. They should be... Before he could finish, the lights on the bridge flickered. I caught a shape flitting in my peripheral vision, just a shadow perhaps. I turned sharply, scanning the edges of the room. Nothing there but the hum of consoles. My lord, is something amiss? The underling asked nervously. I shook my head. No, just the lighting. Get engineering on that. Meanwhile, what is the status of Deus Legion? He bowed awkwardly and left, mumbling something about contacting engineering. I tried to focus again. Another report flashed onto my console. 6 ships in my fleet had gone dark. 2 cruisers, 3 frigates, and a corvette. Just gone. Engines off, shields dropped, crew unresponsive. No escape pods deployed, no distress calls. I ordered nearby ships to investigate. Peering out the viewport, I watched as several vessels moved in to assist. Then, one of the rescue ships lost power too. Its lights snuffed out as if by a malicious hand. My concerns deepened. I typed a few commands trying to raise a channel. But if their power was gone, they wouldn't receive me anyway. I cursed my lapse in logic and set the console aside. A few minutes later, a search team's report came in. They'd boarded one of the dark vessels and found it empty. No crew, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just silence and abandoned rooms. It was as though the entire crew had vanished into thin air. Then came the worst news yet. Deus Legion, the pride of our ground forces, the elite troops numbering over 6,000 men, had been found dead. Every single one. The report included images, and I regretted opening them. The scenes were beyond horrifying. Severed limbs, missing heads, armor torn open as though by monstrous claws. Some corpses were mutilated beyond recognition, others simply hollowed out husks. The expressions on many faces, twisted into masks of unimaginable terror, suggested they'd confronted something far worse than any human. I fought the urge to vomit. I had seen battlefields before, but this was different. This brutality didn't match the humans' known capabilities. They were cunning, yes, but not monstrous in such a way. Our soldiers, genetically enhanced and armed with superior weaponry, should have dominated easily. Instead, they were slaughtered in ways that made no tactical sense. It was as if some malevolent force was toying with us. New reports poured in like a torrent. Scout teams missing. Slaver units gone silent. Attempts to chase down human survivors ended in grisly ambushes. Armored columns malfunctioned. Tanks literally falling apart as if corroded from within. One by one, the lines of communication vanished. My console's channels grew quiet as captains and teams fell off the grid. Panic tugged at my heart. I had never experienced such a complete breakdown of control. I reached again for the internal ship sensors. The lights overhead flickered again. This time, in the brief strobe of darkness, I saw something smeared along the bulkheads. a purple streak of blood, leading into a shadowy corridor. I stood, grabbing my ceremonial sword from its stand. The blade was ancient, a relic of conquests past, but sturdy and real enough to feel reassuring. I moved slowly toward the corridor, every step careful. The ship's usual hum sounded oddly hollow now. I could sense something lurking out of sight, observing me, savoring my fear. My underlings were all gone. Not just gone. They'd been here moments ago, but now silence reigned, as if the crew had evaporated. I advanced deeper into the passageway. The flickering lights made the shadows dance. The faint odor of blood hung in the recycled air. Then, as I reached the end of the corridor, a stench hit me like a physical blow. Blood and offal mingled with charred flesh. I found the remains of my crew in a gruesome tableau. Faces peeled off, skulls bared, limbs torn from sockets, some bodies pinned to walls with bone shards. Insectoid species, once loyal servants, lay on their backs, carapaces split and organs scattered. Every color of blood, red, blue, gold, purple, painted a macabre masterpiece of death. My stomach heaved. I tried to keep steady, but tears of shock welled in my eyes. I had seen countless battles, but nothing like this. A flicker of movement to my left made me whirl, sword slicing through empty air. Whatever I had seen was gone before my blade touched it. My sword lodged into a doorframe, and I couldn't dislodge it easily. I abandoned the blade and snatched a rifle from the disemboweled arms of a fallen crewman. The lights went out again, this time completely. The ship's power was failing, leaving me with only the rifle's flashlight and the faint glow of emergency indicators. I retreated back towards the bridge, guided by the soft luminescence of a console. The entire fleet had gone dark, reports indicated. Our proud armada rendered helpless and silent. Breathing heavily, I decided to flee. I would not die here. I would reach an escape pod and attempt to return home. Better to face the Emperor's wrath for failure than to die in this floating slaughterhouse. I planned my route. First, I must wipe the ship's data core, deny these monsters any gleaning of our secrets. Then I would take a pod and leave. Navigating the corridors by flashlight, I discovered something else impossible. Where the corpses had been moments before, now there was nothing. No bodies, no blood, just pristine deck plating. Reality twisted around me. Fear rattled my mind, threatening to unravel my sanity. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a trick, a hallucination. Maybe I was losing my mind. But the smell lingered in the air, confirming the reality of what I'd seen. I pressed forward toward the data core room. Along the way I heard whispers, inhuman sounds, moans, faint screams as if echoing from distant dimensions. My skin prickled. I kept the rifle at the ready, finger on the trigger, firing at shadows that might have been nothing. The darkness felt alive. Reaching the data core chamber, I opened the door and stepped inside, and my nerve nearly failed me. The room had been turned into a charnel house of skeletal remains. The computation crew were now bones dangling from the ceiling by their own sinews, runes and sigils painted in their blood on walls and floors. A crude idol made of skulls, each contorted in silent agony, stood sentinel in the center. I doubled over, vomiting violently on the deck. My body trembled. The rifle slipped in my grip, but I managed not to drop it. Summoning every scrap of willpower, I stepped over Bones to reach the terminal. It was dead. No power, no response. Even local backup batteries had been drained. I couldn't even purge the data. Forced to abandon that plan, I turned to leave. As I did, a skeleton fell from the wall and landed on me. I screamed, shoving it aside, smashing it into a window. Bone shards scattered. This nightmare refused to end. I sprinted away, heart pounding. I aimed to reach the escape pods no matter what lurked in the darkness. The closer I got to the pods, the louder the strange noises became. Whispers turned to shrieks, then animalistic growls and roars. Shapes darted at the edges of my vision, I fired blindly, muzzle flashes painting grotesque murals of light and shadow. Doors loomed ahead, escape pod access. By some miracle, one pod was still powered. I lunged for it. Just as I keyed the launch sequence, something seized my ankle. I howled, twisting around. The flashlight revealed a nightmare of mismatched flesh and bone. One of my own crew, or what was left of him, holding me with impossible strength. I recognized a face partially eaten, eyes glowing crimson, teeth replaced by jagged shards of bone. "Get off me!" I screamed, kicking desperately. Its grip like iron, it pinned me against a bulkhead. Close now, I could smell its foul breath, reeking of decay and malevolence. I saw something beyond mere gore in those eyes. A gleeful intelligence. My captor spoke, voice a guttural rasp. "Hubris, arrogance, hatred, greed. You reek of it." The words twisted my gut. How could this thing talk? I gagged, tears streaming. "What are you?" I managed, voice cracking. It snarled, "We are shadows, nightmares given form. Once we fed off humanity's fear and emotion. Their souls were potent, their flesh exquisite. But as they dwindled, we restrained ourselves. If we hunted them to extinction, we'd starve. We've not killed for millennia, waiting for them to recover. Then you came along." I stammered, trying to form words. "You hate humans. Why not join us against them?" The creature roared, animal and furious. "We hate no one, we simply feed. Humans were once abundant, their minds rich feasts of terror. Now they are too few. We need new prey, and you brought yourself here flaunting your cruelty and violence. Your evil tastes richer than any human's fear." It pressed me harder into the wall. I could barely breathe. Please!" I choked. I had never begged for my life before, not even to the Emperor. Yet here I was, reduced to pitiful whimpers. The horror laughed, a sound like bones grinding. "Evil always tastes sweeter. Your screams, your begging, they season the meal. The hunter becomes the hunted." It shoved me brutally, half throwing me towards the escape pod, letting me drop inside. "Your gods will not save you," it hissed, a chuckle dripping with mockery. It slapped the launch button. The pod seal engaged, and I watched through the small viewport as the creature stepped back. Behind it, dozens, no, hundreds, of glowing eyes peered from dark corners. Faces, half-eaten or mutated, grinned with animal hunger. The ship's windows were filled with them too, the entire vessel infested with these abominations, staring at me, silent promises of torment if I ever returned. "Now we hunt you," the creature said, voice echoing telepathically through my mind. "We are patient. We are eternal. We can hide anywhere in any shadow. Your kind unleashed us upon the universe. You will never know peace again." The pod's engines fired. Stasis foam engulfed me, initiating a long cryogenic journey home. As freezing darkness claimed my consciousness, I had one last look at the ship. Hundreds of eyes, twisted faces, hungry grins. My fleet, my proud armada, turned into a haunted graveyard of horrors. What had I done? If only I had left that planet alone. My arrogance, my greed, brought these entities back into the cosmos. The humans had once held them at bay by existing in large numbers, providing a steady feast, maintaining some macabre balance. Now, with humanity nearly extinct, these nightmares turned to us instead. In those final moments of consciousness, I understood I had changed the course of history. We thought we came to conquer, to enslave a lesser species. Instead, we had awakened an ancient predator, older and more terrible than we could comprehend. They would feed not just on humans, but on all sentient life they encountered. And I, in my arrogance, had opened the door. Drifting into stasis sleep, I prayed to forgotten gods and hollow idols that something, somewhere could stop them. But I knew deep down, this was my legacy. I had set monsters loose, and nothing could bring them back under control. When I awake, if I awake, back home, I will face a trial. I will stand before the Emperor and explain how an entire fleet vanished, how a sure victory over a broken world ended in silence and madness. I cannot tell him the truth. He would never believe it. He would think me mad. Perhaps I am. If I attempt to warn them about the creatures, who would listen? A general like me, returning alone, shrieking tales of ghosts and shadows feeding on the souls of evil men. They'd laugh, or worse, they'd execute me for cowardice and failure. My best hope is to remain silent, to try to forget. But how could I forget those eyes, those contorted smiles? In the darkness of stasis, I relived the horror endlessly, the corridor of corpses, then made pristine again, as if reality itself were bending to their will. The vanishings, the silent ships, the screams of Deus Legion, their mighty armor shredded, the devouring of minds and flesh, the casual disregard for physics and reason. They manipulated not just the physical world but also our senses and perceptions. In my nightmares, I see human survivors lurking in distant corners of their ruined cities, eyes hollow, minds broken by war. Perhaps they once knew these monsters. Maybe they told stories in ancient times, myths of demons and nightmares that thrived on fear. Could that be why humans developed such rich imaginations and horror legends, passing them down through their cultures? We dismissed these stories as primitive superstition. Now I know better. The humans must have found a way to live with these nightmares. By sheer numbers, by spreading their presence so thin, the monsters could never feast deeply enough to reveal themselves. Humanity's fall changed the balance, starving these entities. Then we came along, brimming with cruelty and violence, a banquet laid out before them. I recall the words spoken by that half-rotted corpse. "We have not killed for millennia until you arrived." Millennia. They have been lurking, dormant, waiting. Our invasion was the key, the trigger that allowed them to emerge. We slaughtered billions, reducing the humans to a whisper. This forced the nightmares to adapt or perish. They adapted by switching prey, directly onto us. What will the galaxy look like after this? If these creatures can travel through shadows and vanish crews without a trace, what stops them from infesting another fleet, another empire? Perhaps nothing. Maybe, as I drift through space, they spread from ship to ship, world to world, using some inscrutable method. Did any of them stow away in my escape pod's circuits, lurking behind the dim lights of the stasis chamber? I am too tired to think. Fear and regret consume me. The stasis chemicals flood my bloodstream, slowing my heart, icing my mind. With the last sparks of consciousness, I understand that this is not merely my personal tragedy. It's a galactic calamity. We tried to annihilate humanity and ended up unleashing something far worse than any human could ever have been. In the silent void between stars, my escape pod carrying a terrified, broken warlord drifts toward home. By the time I arrive, decades might have passed. Will I find my empire intact, or will these nightmares have reached it first? I imagine stepping out of the pod into a dimly lit hangar, seeing familiar soldiers and officers waiting. Perhaps I'd try to warn them. I'd say, "Shadows. They hide in the corners of your vision. They devour entire crews and legions. They feed on fear and evil." They would doubtless mock me, attribute my words to delirium, but then, maybe after a few nights, one ship in orbit would go silent. Another would lose its crew. Panic would spread, and they would recall my words. Too late. The horrors would feed again, just as they had on that distant battlefield. Now, as my thoughts slow, I can only ask myself a question again and again. What have I done? I have unleashed nightmares. I have turned the universe into a darker place. Had I left that last continent of humans alive, had I not insisted on total annihilation, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe the monsters would have remained dormant, feeding gently on humanity's fear, maintaining the fragile status quo. Instead, I ensured that the nightmares must expand, must find new prey to sustain themselves. They have awakened to a galaxy full of other species, my people, our rivals, other empires beyond our knowledge. They will harvest terror and flesh from all of us, and I, a once proud commander, will return a husk of a being, hollow with guilt and shame. No matter what happens next, I know I deserve the horrors that come. For if there is a justice in the void, it punishes arrogance and cruelty by reflecting them back 1,000-fold. In the darkness of sleep, I form a final prayer, not to my emperor, not to any gods of conquest, but perhaps to these nightmares themselves. Please, find it in your monstrous hearts to show mercy to someone, somewhere. But I know the answer even before I drift off. They care nothing for mercy. They thrive on fear and suffering. I fade into unconscious stasis, with only one certainty. The horrors I have unleashed today will haunt the stars for an eternity to come.